Boss battles. They're an essential aspect of gaming that can be integrated in a plethora of ways. Sometimes they're a challenging distraction from the main storyline, sometimes they're just happy to be there. And other times, they're an imposing boundary made to test your abilities to the absolute limit, so much so that they culminate in you quitting to your desktop and typing a scathing 3-page diatribe about the new Elden Ring DLC because it was too difficult. If you are this kind of person, good news, Kotaku's hiring. But some boss battles, no matter how demanding, can often be trivialized by abusing certain exploits. More specifically, in the case of this video at least, by completing certain tasks either within or outside of the boss fight. Take C-Sim, for example. He's about to give his sworn enemy Kevin a piece of his mind and a well-deserved knuckle sandwich. No, not literally, that would be cannibalism. Why else do you think Kevin isn't legally allowed to be within 300 feet of a morgue? C-Sim could opt for the traditional route of swinging his fists and hurling insults like there's no tomorrow, but that would be a rather lengthy and tiresome undertaking. Instead, C-Sim has gone for the more methodical approach, by sneaking into Kevin's house, tampering with his toilet, and patiently waiting for Kevin to handle some business. And then, right as the water erupts from the toilet, C-Sim goes in for the attack, quite literally catching Kevin with his pants down. Is it practical? Yes. Will he lose street cred for using such an underhanded tactic? Also yes, but at least he won the fight. This is what I'm talking about today, bosses that can be made less arduous by completing optional objectives, or by performing specific and slightly unconventional actions. Enjoy! So to properly set the stage for this video, I'm gonna kick things off with one of the more commonly recognized examples, El Gigante from Resident Evil 4. So the Resident Evil series actually has more than a few notable boss fights that can be completed in alternate ways. Hell, Resident Evil 4 itself is packed to the brim with these. One of the earliest examples, however, occurs in this game's second main boss fight, El Gigante. For first-time players, El Gigante can certainly be a hectic and stress-inducing boss fight, given that you're lacking some of the more, shall I say, practical weapons at this point in the game. The traditional method revolves around firing away at El Gigante while avoiding his massive lumbering swings and waiting for the Las Plagas parasite to violently protrude from his back. You can then either shoot the parasite or jump on its back and slash away with your trusty knife for a more cinematic takedown. Do this a handful of times and El Gigante is toast. However, let's rewind a little bit. Early on, you'll discover this wolf right here frantically attempting to escape a bear trap. Now, I'd imagine that most people would have seen an innocent animal in a perilous situation and pried the bear trap open, allowing him to escape. It's not a mandatory objective, but it might as well be, considering that returning players were put into cardiac arrest when finding out that saving the wolf was ostensibly removed from the remake. Thankfully, it was just Capcom pulling the old switcheroo on the audience, those little bastards. Because after getting your shit kicked in by Mendez and this cabin over here, you'll find the wolf not too far outside. Now, whenever you take on El Gigante past this point, the fight will play out normally at first. However, at about the halfway point, an unlikely hero emerges from the shadows and unleashes a mighty howl. And what do you know, it's not just any wolf, but the same wolf that you helped out of the bear trap from earlier. The wolf will now assist you in combat against El Gigante by diverting his attention away from you, allowing you to inflict damage on the weak point on his back. He actually does a pretty good job at distracting the guy, so much so that there's a point where he'll lead El Gigante into a wall that causes a plethora of rocks to tumble onto the fight line, leaving him temporarily stunned as you attack his weak spot. However, if you're in the midst of a speed run and you don't have the time to wait for the wolf to assist you in battle, there's always another option, and when I say another option, I'm referring to the infinite rocket launcher that you can unlock after completing the game, which one-shots every single boss. Thankfully, it'll only cost you a measly 2 million pesetas, or 13,000 US dollars for comparison. Might not sound like too much to some, but damn it, I'm a 23-year-old YouTuber. Do you really think I have those kind of funds?
Ah, Jack, I see you managed to make it here. You've been busy, Jack. I think it's time for you to rest.
Okay, so I want to preface this section by talking about one of my favorite animated films of all time, 1993's The Nightmare Before Christmas. It's a film packed to the brim with creativity, visually striking stop-motion animation, and a top-tier soundtrack to boot. It's also one of the most unconventional Disney films that the company has ever attached its name to. But hey, if it means they'll be able to sell Halloween-related merchandise whenever October rolls around, then you bet your sweet ass they're gonna be proudly associated with it. Now, contrary to popular belief, this film did receive a sequel of sorts, albeit in a slightly unorthodox unorthodox format for the time. I'm talking about 2004's The Nightmare Before Christmas, Oogie's Revenge. This game takes place a year after the film's plot, and sees a resurrected Oogie Boogie terrorizing Halloween Town and its inhabitants, and it's up to Jack to restore order. It's essentially Disney's closest parallel to Devil May Cry, and while it might be lacking the complexities and flashy combos of that respective series, I'd argue that it's a flawed yet undeniably charming and well-produced game that does a genuinely fantastic job of introducing a younger audience to the hack-and-slash genre. Now, this game is actually quite faithful to the original film in a myriad of ways, with a prominent example exhibited in chapters 6 through 8, which is also the example that we're going to be using today. At the beginning of chapter 6, after saving Sally from an abnormally large spider, which if you're a theater kid is probably a semi-regular occurrence, especially if it's a gothic rendition of Charlotte's Web, you'll find Sally near the hanging tree, but fret not, she's not going to try anything drastic. She's a ragdoll for God's sake, and the skeletons already took up all the damn space anyway. If you talk to Sally, she'll tell you that she's worried about her creator, Dr. Finkelstein, and tasks you with going after him in his laboratory. However, she'll also request that you return back to her right before entering the aforementioned lab. If you ignore her offer, you'll be tasked with easily one of the most needlessly frustrating boss fights in the entire game, Dr. Finkelstein. Now, why are we fighting him? Well, in what I can only imagine was an awkward yet somewhat sexually charged encounter, Oogie managed to swap out Dr. Finkelstein's brain with a different one, causing the Mad Doctor himself to become hostile towards Jack. This boss fight revolves around you using your soul robber to pry open Finkelstein's head, then heading over to a surgical tray that conveniently, and rather proudly, displays his real brain and then hurling it back into his head. This wouldn't be too demanding of a boss encounter if it wasn't for his assembly of weapons and traps, compounded with the extremely brisk amount of time you have to throw his brain inside of his head. And on top of all of that, you have to do this twice, because for some godforsaken reason, you have to pick up the two halves of his brain one by one. Now, there is a secret method that trivializes half of the boss battle. Yes, half and only half. I know that sounds oddly specific, but please just stay with me for a second. Remember when Sally said she wanted to talk to you before entering the lab? Well, if you decide to take her up on her offer, you'll have to wait until you reach chapter 7, which begins with you standing outside of the laboratory after coaxing Finkelstein's assistant Igor into abandoning his position. Don't give in to the temptations though, because you're gonna want to steer yourself in the opposite direction and hightail it all the way back to the hanging tree. And by that I mean, go for a light jog all the way back, because Jack has no sense of urgency, and I'm assuming that this is his definition of sprinting. After that, you'll find Sally in the exact same spot as before, and if you talk to her, she'll give you a list of ingredients that are required to make a sleeping potion for Dr. Finkelstein, the exact same one seen in the film. You'll have to collect Deadly Nightshade, Frog's Breath, and Wormswort, which will result in you going on a cumbersome and long-winded series of fetch quests, but trust me, the payoff is worth it in the end. Head to a nearby grave to obtain the Deadly Nightshade, then head to the Witch's Shop in Halloween Town and buy some Wormswort, and then head all the way back to the outside of the laboratory, take a left near the entrance, and snatch up a frog to get the Frog's Breath. Then, after all of this, you'd think that Sally would maybe, I don't know, meet you halfway to expedite the process. But no, she patiently waits for you all the way back near the hanging tree. Jesus fucking Christ, Sally, don't you think Jack has enough on his plate already? Meet up with Sally and she'll brew up the aforementioned sleeping potion. Head all the way back to the laboratory, jump through a few more hoops and hurdles, and you'll eventually come face to face with Finkelstein, but this time there's a twist. Jack gives him the sleeping potion and Finkelstein will doze off, giving you enough time to replace one of the two main chunks of his brain required to win the boss fight. That being said, you gotta complete this step in a relatively brisk amount of time, because in a handful of seconds, Dr. Finkelstein will spontaneously awaken from his slumber and continue the boss fight as normal. It might not sound like a massive advantage given the relatively brief amount of time you're given to pull this off, but considering that you're shaving off half of the fight, which, let me remind you, is a pain in the ass, I'd argue that the hassle was well worth it.
That scurvy brat thinks he can order me around.
What shall we do, Captain Hook?
Nothing! The hold is crawling with heartless. Let them keep an eye on the brat.
You thought I was done talking about Disney, weren't you? Well, not quite yet, because next we're talking about Kingdom Hearts. Throughout the Kingdom Hearts series, you'll journey through an eclectic array of worlds from Disney films, which is, personally, my favorite aspect of the series. In the first Kingdom Hearts, the last Disney world that you'll more than likely visit is Neverland, based on the 1953 animated classic, Peter Pan. Slight caveat though, because this isn't technically Neverland. It's mostly Captain Hook's ship, surrounded by an area that I think is supposed to resemble Neverland, and a last-minute journey to Big Ben. But I'm guessing that pirate ship encircled by a black mass and a last-minute flight to London just didn't roll off the tongue quite as smoothly. Towards the latter half of the visit, you'll naturally go toe-to-toe with Peter Pan's arch-nemesis, Captain Hook. And despite being one of the more comedic and slightly less intimidating villains in Disney's library, he puts up one hell of a fight. So, slightly is the key word here. He has an array of fast attacks that can deal some pretty decent damage, and it doesn't help that the Heartless working alongside him have now evolved so much that they're able to commandeer fully functional pirate ships that are also capable of firing cannons. I'd say that it doesn't make sense, but this is Kingdom Hearts lore we're talking about. None of it makes sense. That being said, Hook still has his fair share of weaknesses, the most prominent of which being fire for some reason, though I'd imagine you could say the same thing about any human that gets lit on fire. However, Hook is a special case, because using the fire spell on him causes him to do one of two things, both of which giving you an advantage in battle. In one instance, he'll adjust his trousers and stand shocked for a moment, which opens him up for an onslaught of attacks. In the other instance, and this one can be a bit more useful depending on how you look at it, he'll frantically run around the ship in reaction to the fire, and will subsequently damage other enemies in the process. Do be careful though, because he can also hurt you, but you can easily circumvent this issue by flying away from him, guarding, or just attempting to hit him. It's not really too hard to get away from. This isn't exactly a foolproof plan to defeat Captain Hook, but it certainly makes the victory against him moderately more feasible. It becomes even more of a cakewalk when Hook gets blasted with fire, sprints around the ship in a panic-stricken state, and crash lands in the water, which causes him to lunge out of said water out of fear of tic-tac noises. Don't worry, Hook, it's getting banned soon. Wrong one. But after this occurs, Hook will then take in his surroundings before pulling a wily coyote and plummeting into the center of the ship, which gives you ample time to lay the smackdown on him. You can abuse this ad nauseum, and considering that Kingdom Hearts 1 magic can refill in a rather brisk amount of time, you'll be able to repeat this method until the codfish is cooked. Ah, the Metal Gear Solid series, the king of unorthodox boss fights. There are quite a few boss fights from the Metal Gear series that I could have easily placed in this spot. You've got everything from the Psycho Mantis fight, which is normally defeated by unplugging your controller and sliding it into the other slot. No, I'm not joking. But you can also defeat him by destroying the nearby statues that have his face plastered on them, which is only revealed after dying a certain number of times. Metal Gear Solid 5 has a couple of these, most notably Quiet and the Burning Man, the latter of which I almost considered for the spot. In the Quiet boss battle, you'll have to strategically avoid her sniper fire and strike when she's unaware of your presence. But you can also beat this fight by just calling in supply drops and dropping them directly on her, which is more of an oversight or an exploit, but it still works to this very day, so have at it, you cheap little bastard. But then there's the Burning Man, who's normally beaten by luring him into conveniently placed water tanks and letting them collapse onto him, or you can just get the blueprint for the water pistol, make said water pistol, and then unload on this guy like it's your anniversary. But the king of this particular topic goes to the end in Metal Gear Solid 3's Snake Eater. The End is an elderly marksman of the highest proficiency, and despite being 100 years old during the events of Metal Gear Solid 3, he still has a keen eye for shooting. Emphasis on the eye part because goddamn, one violent sneeze and this guy's eyeballs become an extra pair of musket rounds. Normally it's an intense and downright harrowing fight at times, because it's just you and a geriatric sniper tactically attempting to eliminate each other with nothing more than the ambience of a jungle and intense breathing accompanying the gameplay. And that's not even mentioning his pet parrot that specializes in scouting you out and making it easier for the End to uncover your location. There are actually a vast array of methods that you can use to beat the End. You can either flat out kill the guy or tranquilize him. You can capture or kill his parrot, the latter of which causes the End to become enraged and as a result renders him more difficult to defeat. Hell, if you want to make the boss fight a bit more manageable, you can even input the Konami code on the map screen during the encounter and you'll be able to uncover his location on the map. However, there are two secret methods that don't just make the boss fight easier but allow you to skip the encounter almost entirely. Firstly, during the segment in the swamp with a name that I'm not even going to attempt to pronounce. If you gain the SVD from the armory before making it to the warehouse docks, you can eventually kill the End before he's escorted out by the guards, which results in the Ocelot unit replacing his boss battle later on. Snake will actually express his disappointment in not being able to fight the guy one-on-one, despite the immense amount of excitement displayed by the support team. However, the second method is one of the most impressive and simultaneously darkly comedic details that I've ever seen in a video game. Let's say that you weren't able to procure a kill on the End before his boss battle. You might think that you'd be confined to partaking in the boss battle, but fear not, there's another solution. If you start the boss battle, quit in frustration, and decide not to touch the game for at least 8 days, you'll return and find that the End has passed away due to his old age. And let me clarify, I'm not talking about 8 in-game days, I'm talking about 8 real-world days. Alternatively, you could also adjust the day on your respective console because the game is coded to only check the date that your console is set to. It's one of the most creative, bizarre, grim, and kind of hilarious optional boss fight methods that I've ever seen in a video game, and I knew that I just had to include it here.
It was a practice run, I got this. Survivor's guilt really messes with people's heads.
What the hell are you doing, Kenny?
You know what? Just run along, Nick, okay?
The Dead Rising series is chock full of memorable, albeit slightly straightforward boss encounters. However, Dead Rising 3 chose to get a little artistic with it. Let me explain what I mean. See, in prior Dead Rising games, psychopaths were simply individuals who lost all semblance of humanity and have resorted to violence and depravity as a means of coping with the apocalypse. Dead Rising 3 is more of the same, but this time, each major psychopath that you'll come across is made to resemble one of the 7 deadly sins. Ooh, how thought-provoking. I didn't know I was watching a David Fincher movie. The deadly sin that we're fixating on today is envy, aka Kenny. Kenny is about as stereotypical of a nerd as they come. He lived in his mom's basement prior to the zombie outbreak, he has an inferiority complex, he's constantly cracking film and comic book references, and while I would wager he's hiding a human-sized body pillow in his closet, this is envy we're talking about, not lust. If you want the latter, I heard Dylan's looking for an assistant.
Gave me blue balls.
However, he's an interesting case, because early on, Kenny is first found as a survivor in the side mission, Time for a Hero. In it, you'll find Kenny cowering in fear and doubt, as he believes that he's incapable of fending for himself against the zombies. After some strong words of encouragement, well, nothing happens, Kenny's still a pussy. However, after killing a handful of zombies in front of Kenny and building a combo weapon in front of him, he'll become confident enough to become a true scholar of survival. However, conceit will soon turn into jealousy, because towards the latter half of the game, you'll be granted the mission Single White Male. And lo and behold, Kenny's gone mad and it's up to you to stop him. After being made aware of Nick's newfound hero status, Kenny becomes aggressively envious of Nick's accomplishments, and seeks to become the more competent survivalist of the city. He even goes so far as to replicate Nick's outfit, and has now mastered the art of crafting combo weapons. It's now up to you to defeat him, and I'll say it right now, Kenny can be pretty tough depending on your tactics. If you attempt to defeat him normally, Kenny will perform a series of attacks with his makeshift junk ball, which I could have sworn he already had at least 2 of because, let's be real, when's the last time this guy took a shower? He'll swing his junk ball and cause projectiles to propel out of it, and it doesn't help that the nearby zombies will make dodging his attacks a needlessly tedious ordeal. However, you can make his boss fight a bit easier. The first method is actually one that's encouraged by the game itself, as at the beginning of the boss fight, you'll be told that crafting combo weapons will intimidate Kenny and leave him vulnerable to attacks. And what do you know, the game wasn't lying, because this method works extremely well. It's technically an optional method of defeating the boss, but the constant barrage of messages telling you to craft combo weapons makes it feel like a mandatory objective. However, there is another method that isn't frequently mentioned because it actually requires an external piece of technology, and I'm of course talking about the Kinect. See, Dead Rising 3 was an Xbox One exclusive when it released in 2013, and to this day, the only other way of playing the game is via the PC. However, when this game launched on the Xbox One, it also came equipped with the functionality for the Kinect, which was packaged with the Xbox One. You can distract zombies and call them over to your location, and you can even command survivors to attack instead of pressing a series of buttons on your controller. Granted, most people would have probably preferred playing this without the Kinect, given how shoddy the hardware could be at times, but it was still a nice touch nonetheless. That being said, if you have the Kinect plugged in, you can actually use it to your advantage in Kenny's boss fight by shouting "copycat" into the device. This will cause Kenny to be intimidated in a similar vein to how he would when watching you craft a combo weapon, which naturally leaves him vulnerable to your attacks. Defeating Kenny gives you the blueprint for the junk ball and the option to either leave him to his demise or recruit him as a survivor. I chose to recruit him, which hopefully doesn't have any long-term consequences, but then again, this is the same series that lets you tame a goddamn tiger and give it to your daughter as a present. And let me tell you, it's quite telling that the true potential danger isn't a deranged geek or a fully grown tiger, but instead a man who spent too much time trying on goofy masks instead of getting his daughter some Zombrex. Priorities, Chuck. Priorities.
It's all over the shop. You'll be one of them, sooner or later.
So I want to start this segment off by stating that I was not at all expecting a boss battle from a FromSoft entry to be on this list, but hey, here we are. FromSoft, the developers known for Dark Souls, Demon Souls, and most recently Elden Ring, just to name a few, are notorious for their extremely demanding and arduous boss battles that are reviled by some, but acclaimed by most. If I had to pick the overall hardest FromSoft game, I would argue that it's a tie between Bloodborne and Sekiro: Shadows Die Twice. Both are fantastic games, mind you, but I would not recommend them to someone who's just starting to become accustomed to the Souls-like formula. For the sake of this video, we're going to be focusing on Bloodborne. Bloodborne is cited by many hardcore Souls-like fans as one of FromSoft's finest entries, most notably for its far more aggressive take on the combat system. Instead of medieval Eldritch horror, you have gothic and Lovecraftian Eldritch horror. Instead of shields, you have guns, which sounds like a comparatively simplified change until you realize that you have to account for bullets and the ability to time your shots correctly. It's fucking hard and equally fucking terrifying. One of the earliest bosses that you'll stumble upon is none other than Father Gascoigne, a priest turned hunter who's who's become deranged and devoured by the bloodlust of hunting. You'll find him hacking away at a body post-killing spree, and to say that it's an intimidating first impression would be an understatement. For being the first boss in the game, Gascoigne is, to put it bluntly, a major pain in the ass to fight. He's constantly keeping you on your feet with fast and brutal axe swings, his strikes can deal a fairly high sum of damage, and if you try to get away from the guy, guess what? He's packing some heat too. And right when you start to pick up on his patterns, he reaches his final form and evolves into a bloodthirsty and ravenous monster, as if he wasn't one already. Now, there is a method that makes the boss fight slightly more forgiving if you're willing to explore more of Central Yharnam, but do be warned, the story behind it is a little bit more on the melancholy side of things. Near the entrance to the sewers, you'll find a house with a little girl inside, who was revealed to be the daughter of Gascoigne and his wife, Viola. Before Gascoigne was completely plagued by the bloodlust, he would venture out and partake in late-night hunts, almost completely forgetting his family in the process. In order for him to return home and remember his family, his daughter would play a music box that would lure Gascoigne back to his house and regain his sense of humanity. However, after one particularly violent hunting session, Gascoigne gave in to the bloodlust and became completely engulfed in the hunt, becoming the very monster that he sought to eradicate from existence in the first place. After you speak to his daughter, she'll bestow you with the aforementioned music box, and request that you find her mother, who has allegedly been looking for Gascoigne, and well, how am I gonna tell her? After this, you can head back to Gascoigne's location, and in the middle of the battle, you can use the music box to temporarily stun him and leave him open for just about any attack that you can imagine, though I'd argue that charged heavy attacks are gonna yield the best results. However, it's best to use this rather sparingly, because if you choose to play the music box 3 times, Gascoigne will prematurely evolve into his beastly form, and the boss fight becomes immensely more challenging. And no, if you're wondering, you can't use the music box during his final form, because it doesn't affect him in the slightest. In other words, it's wise to use this once in his first phase, and once in his second phase to inflict the most damage possible. Or alternatively, you could use the music box 3 consecutive times without doing any damage to this guy if you're feeling a little extra masochistic, aka the same people that complain the game is too difficult while also refusing to summon. Okay, I'm done. But you know what? For all of the hardcore Souls players watching this video, I'm gonna prove to you that I don't need a music box to win this fight. I've leveled up my stats, I've gotten good, and the video intro probably already placed a target on my back. Though considering the audience I called out also plays games on easy mode, I think I'll be just fine. And would you look at that? I'm a couple hits away from being deemed a champion. Alright, that's enough Bloodborne for me today. Okay, just one more try. And for the final entry, we're taking a look at The Legend of Zelda: Twilight Princess. So, the Legend of Zelda series offers a vast array of interpretations of the world of Hyrule, with some entries doing away with the iconic location entirely. However, there's generally going to be at least some consistency between a majority of the games, with a prominent example being the main villain of the series, Ganondorf, with some exceptions. He is to Link what Bowser is to Mario, what Darth Vader is to Luke, what Chef Joseph is to Gordon Ramsay.
You wanna talk about fucking fighting?
Oh, wow.
You wanna get fucking rough?
Do you think I'm scared?
And generally, almost every mainline Zelda game will culminate in a climactic duel against him. Twilight Princess is no different, and with Ganondorf's more foreboding and ominous design, my personal favorite look in the series, you know damn well that shit's about to go down. Mind you, you've already defeated Zant, you've scoured the fields of Hyrule for all the rupees and secrets that you can imagine, and you've saved up enough cash for this ostensibly badass armor, only to realize that you've been scammed out of your hard-earned money. But nothing will prepare you for the Ganondorf boss fight. It's not the hardest battle in the series, sure, but it pushes your skills and reflexes to the absolute apex. And all it takes is a few panic-induced inputs for Ganondorf to knock you out cold and have you looking at this screen wondering what the hell just happened. It starts with a battle as Wolf Link against Ganon, before a subsequent segment on horseback in which you have to get Zelda to line up a shot against Ganondorf with her bow. Maybe if it were a motorcycle and a submachine gun, things would play out a bit differently. Fuck you, Big Smoke. And then after all of that, you're finally able to engage in a one-on-one battle with the Dark Lord himself, which, as I mentioned earlier, can be fairly difficult if unprepared. What do I mean by unprepared? Well, I'm not talking about the sword techniques that you can learn throughout the game on your own volition, I'm talking about honing in your fishing skills. See, for some peculiar reason, Ganondorf becomes an absolute pushover once you bust out the fishing rod. Remember the fishing rod? I barely do. There's a high likelihood that you'll use the fishing rod only twice throughout the story, or maybe 3 times if I'm being extra charitable, before leaving it in your item bag to collect dust. However, pulling this out and using it in the middle of the fight causes Ganondorf to become so enamored with the lure that he'll cease whatever he's doing and stare at it in pure astonishment. Distract him long enough and you'll be able to quickly sheath the fishing rod and attack Ganondorf a handful of times while he's still open. And if you're wondering, no, there's no penalty or restriction for using this thing. You can distract Ganondorf, hit him a few times, pull out the fishing rod as he's advancing towards you, and watch as he continues to become hypnotized by the lure of the fishing rod. To this day, I'm not entirely sure if this is a glitch or a legitimate strategy used to defeat the boss, because it's in every version of the game, including the HD remaster for the Wii U, and this wasn't even the first time that something as innocuous as a fishing rod was able to undermine a boss fight. In Ocarina of Time, you can reflect Ganondorf's energy blasts with nothing more than an empty bottle. In A Link to the Past, you can use the bug-catching neck to reflect this guy's energy blasts. No, I'm not trying to pronounce that name, I don't want Zelda fans on my back too. In the original Link's Awakening, you can one-shot the final boss with the boomerang. Hell, not even the subsequent entries avoided this, because in Skyward Sword, you can use a bug net to deflect Demise's charged attacks, and don't even get me started on the creative ways that players were able to beat the final boss in Tears of the Kingdom. So, is this an unintentional yet convenient series of bugs or oversights that you could ruthlessly exploit in the Zelda series? In some instances, sure, but in the case of Twilight Princess, well, that remains a mystery to me. So all in all, what have we learned from this video? Well, sometimes the more cumbersome road is the same one that reaps greater benefits in the long run. Unsolicited aid can lead to an old friend returning the favor. Patience is the ultimate key to victory. Envy is the entity that divides us and should be avoided at all costs. The past is filled with hardship and unimaginable pain, but can be forgotten with enough distraction and, some massacres. And sometimes, just maybe, the simple act of fishing can be the unifying activity that brings us together instead of diverging us from one another. Just maybe. But if you ask me, I think the ultimate lesson learned here is that being a pyromaniac has its benefits.